Happy Halloween and welcome into MOTV4CAST. I'm Riley Winch, and today we'll be talking to Mr. Jacob Carstens, a graduate meteorology student at Florida State University. We'll be talking to him about his experience during Hurricane Michael and covering the storm at Florida State. Hi Jacob, how are you doing today?
Well, thanks for having me on, Riley. I'm doing pretty well myself. Just got off of my other job right now. Got home, thankfully, to the comfort of my own bedroom and research poster, which I hang up in here proudly. But Tallahassee itself is recovering very well from the storm. Pretty much the entire city's back up and running now. We're finally getting a cold front this weekend, so some reason to be excited around here for sure.
Can you give us a general layout of what it was like covering Hurricane Michael, like the schedule that you had for the week of the storm?
Okay, so this isn't our first rodeo doing this. Tallahassee is not an area that receives many tropical cyclones, at least historically speaking, but the last 3 years we've gotten one each year. Hermine 2016, Irma 2017, and now this year with Hurricane Michael, obviously. Our show typically runs each weeknight at 6 o'clock, but when these storms approach and when school shuts down and everything like that, that opens up. We don't have the obligation to do the shows anymore. Basically, all of us just kind of communicate. We have a Facebook group where we get together and sort of chit-chat about who's going to be down there in our studio covering the storm. And the last 3 years now, we've had several people that actually would just ride out the entire storm in the basement of our building, which is a nice interior room. It's really one of the safest places on campus, honestly. So we got some national attention a couple of years ago as part of what we called the Hermine 11, with 11 of us sleeping in the studio as that storm moved through and knocked out power for essentially like 80 to 85% of the city, I think. So it's really it's a very fluid schedule, I guess you could say. You drop in whenever you want. If you want to record a video, when an advisory comes out, you go ahead and do it. Post it on our social media platforms, which is really our primary way of reaching out, even though we do have our TV show on PBS in town. But yeah, that's really how the basics of FSU weather hurricane coverage has gone over the years.
Well, there's definitely no denying that Hurricane Michael was a special opportunity for Florida State meteorology students. But how is it different from some of those other storms you've experienced in your area in the past?
Well, with regards to, if we're going to compared to the last couple of storms, the response to Hurricane Michael in Tallahassee was notably different, mainly because of the lead time that we had at the university to be able to sort of respond. We had 2 days before the storm hit when the school announced the closure. So with that being said, a lot of people were actually able to just skip out of Tallahassee, go home, go up north or west or south or anything like that. Couldn't have done that 2 years ago because with Hermine in 2016, we did not find out about a school cancellation until the morning of the storm because it was such a rapidly intensifying storm at the very end. It was expected to be, well, at least for a long time, it was just tagged as an invest and not really expected to be a major threat. And then it just intensified into a hurricane in essentially 24 hours. So people weren't able to get out that time. And then with Irma, since it affected essentially the entire state of Florida, everybody driving up from South Florida came up to Tallahassee and drove through there, which pretty much took away all the gas and other resources that we would have had to be able to get out. So despite having better lead time for that storm, there wasn't really much of a, I guess, mass exodus of people from Tallahassee. So in that sense, the preparation for Michael was much more streamlined and I think much more effective compared to the last two, which was good.
Yeah, and I understand that you went and toured the damage from Hurricane Michael, so where did you go and what was that damage like?
Well, I don't have a car myself, so I pretty much just took a lap around the FSU campus and figured we would leave the more, I guess, official damage surveys to the authorities and the Weather Service and all that, especially because Interstate 10 was effectively closed about a county or two west of Tallahassee with all the tree damage that was going on there, and of course all of the devastation that unfortunately occurred in areas like Panama City and a little bit further inland where they recorded close to Category 3 strength wind gusts as far inland as Marianna, Florida, which is 50 miles inland, something along those lines, about an hour drive from us here in Tallahassee. So some of us were surveying around the rest of the city, and we found that we were essentially right on the edge of things being a little bit worse for wear, because the north and west sides of town got hit particularly hard, where we saw noticeably more tree damage and power lines and everything like that compared to Hermine, which was sort of our reference storm from a couple of years ago. Campus itself was actually largely spared. We only had two, if I'm not mistaken, major road blockages that occurred from downed trees, and the entire FSU campus essentially retained power through the entirety of the storm. So really, even though we measured 70-mile-per-hour wind gusts in Tallahassee, the FSU immediate area could not have been much luckier with it.
Okay, so final question. What is the biggest takeaway you have from covering the storm?
Well, we could say everything about just taking the storm seriously, and how, especially in North Florida, with how much of a tree-lined sort of area that we are in. We're near the Apalachicola National Forest. Here in North Florida, it's just off to our south and west of Tallahassee, and some of those inland areas, like you might have heard of a town called Bluntstown or Mariana or other places like that, right in the heart of the forests. So, one thing to take into account, I guess, for us in regards to, why to take these storms seriously is exactly that. We've already talked so much about the storm surge threats and all the coastal flooding and everything like that that can occur. But because, of storms like this, and still the challenges that we oftentimes have in forecasting intensity, you can't just assume necessarily that, a storm's going to go 50 miles inland and just die out and not be a problem for people in other states or anything like that, even when it gets swept up by the winds and races off at 20 miles per hour. I think this storm is a really good example of that. Because the past storms that have hit here have really, not been as big a deal in some of those inland areas. But like I said, we were still dealing with 100-plus-mile-an-hour wind gusts, 50, 60 miles inland, and, sustained hurricane-force winds that were trying to cross really into middle Georgia. So with that being said, we have a ways to go in terms of really figuring it out with intensity forecasting, as much as we know about the physics of hurricanes. But this is why we are so urgent about the warnings, everything that happened with this and its intensification into what was very close to, and after the season's over, might be upgraded to a Category 5 storm.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jacob Carstens, and I hope to be talking with you soon.
All right, sounds good. Come to Florida State.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us here on MOTV4CAST. Have a great start to your November, and I'll see you here next time.